By 1960, Peter Sellers was a household name. But aware of the fickle nature of fame, he increased his efforts to control his career and his destiny.
With Sellers, he was so insecure, he was so vulnerable, he didn't know who he was from day to day, whether it would work, whether he'd get work. And so he started to rely on soothsayers and people who'd read entrails and tea leaves and all this kind of thing.
Sellers' favourite soothsayer, or clairvoyant, was Maurice Woodruff, the mystic Meg of his day.
Right, Morris is 13th of December 19...
Woodruff exerted a lasting influence on Sellers, one that was to shape the rest of his life.
Maurice Woodruff was a very small man, very neat, overtly gay when it wasn't really permissible to be even remotely gay, and claimed he was the seventh son of a seventh son and was a gypsy, and how much of that was true, I don't know. He was certainly successful as a clairvoyant, whether it was instinct and an ability to anticipate what somebody wanted to hear and kind of work it into a lot of mumbo-jumbo. I simply don't know, but he was successful.
I wasn't enamoured with the gentleman. I always felt that he'd found out about his subjects before he met them, and therefore could talk about them rather freely.
His style was, he'd be talking as we're talking now, and suddenly he would say some extraordinary thing about you. If he didn't get it right, he would also have an explanation that the reason he didn't get it right is that you're in a holding pattern like an aeroplane or something, he'd always explain, but you are waiting to land, and he got it wrong, but in 6 weeks' time, or maybe it was 6 years' time, it would happen.
Sellers became increasingly dependent on Woodruff's advice. Even when filming abroad, his assistant, Bert Mortimer, contacted Maurice for psychic readings by phone.
He'd sit in his chair at the table, and I'd get Maurice on the phone, and then Maurice would instruct me to tell him what card to lay down, and he would lay them down in sequence as Maurice said. Then I would tell him what they were, then Maurice would give him a reading. And that's how we did it. It was a three-way thing. Me talking to Maurice in England and relaying to Peter wherever we may be.
The professional relationship between Woodruff and Sellers soon became personal. Sellers lent on his new companion as an emotional prop as much as a clairvoyant.
Maurice certainly had a strength and a confidence and a certainty about himself, which, oddly enough, Sellers lacked. He was never sure about himself. He was never convinced that good things were going to happen. He was always convinced that bad things were going to happen. So he needed somebody in his life to tell him he was great. And once he got that reassurance, he kind of fulfilled the prophecy.
The huge success that Sellers did achieve didn't always sit easily with him. Beneath the trappings of stardom beat the heart of a suburban man.
Mr. Mickey.
Yes, Mr. Martin?
Could you try to find a quarter nib, please?
The trouble with Peter Sellers was that underneath all these Baroque performances that he gave, he was actually rather ordinary and plain and blank. A bit of a Mr. Nobody, really.
He really should have been a bank manager. He had a very bourgeois, ordinary, suburban set of values that was kind of just not haywire by being a superstar and a heartthrob and all that. He couldn't really handle it. He was basically someone who needed to be working 9 to 5 and cleaning his car and playing golf on Saturday.
Now, when he was married to Anne, his first wife, she kept control on that kind of danger in his life. But when he started to get really successful, he divorced Anne, and the control over him began to slip away. He was on his own, and that was madness.
He said at one point in time when he split up with his wife, Anne Levy, and he was in Hampstead all on his own in this enormous penthouse, that he felt like jumping out of the window.
He had everything. He had money, he had a lovely family, lovely home, all he could want, and threw it all away. Blew the whole lot. He had everything, and I think he regretted that later.
But there was one relationship that wasn't as dispensable. As domestic life collapsed around him, Sellers leant all the more heavily on Maurice Woodruff. Major decisions were left in the hands of his clairvoyant.
I think Maurice was always in a very powerful position vis-à-vis Peter's career. For example, he would guide him into certain parts.
Now, Peter has got a very interesting time. Firstly, I think you're going to find he's going to do a film within this coming year, which there will be, the harbour of the film will be a robbery.
He used to ring up my father's agent and say, now then, what are we doing this week? And his agent said, well, I want to make this film and we don't want to do that. So he said, I can see you coming to a film with a P, 2P, some pink and a jewel. Yes, you know, right.
I don't know whether it's jewels or what it is, but it will be like the old Peter Sellers films, not a clever film, you know, a really funny film.
Eventually this became a very dodgy area because producers got to hear about Maurice's very strong influence over Peter's way of thinking about what parts he would take. And they got to Maurice and would say, I've got a wonderful part for Peter, you know, if you could happen to mention it next time you're reading The Teacups, you know, it would be great for me, and there's a couple of bob in it for you.
He tells him, you're going to be doing this and this is going to be great for you, and he does it and it's great for him, and then he now believes 100% in Maurice. Once it works, I mean, you're going to come back for more, aren't you, really?
One of Woodruff's most famous predictions was perhaps misinterpreted.
Maurice Woodruff told him he was going to meet somebody with the initials B.E. Now, I was there when he predicted that, and I know it to be a fact.
With the first Pink Panther film in pre-production, the B.E. Woodruff had in mind was the director Blake Edwards. But a chance encounter in early 1964 ushered a very different B.E. into Sellers' life.
Sellers was staying at the Dorchester, and this beautiful girl was checking in, and he looked at her name on her passport. It was Britt Eklund. So I think he probably married her by mistake.
Sellers was married to Britt within a matter of days, and within a few weeks they were living in Los Angeles, where Sellers was working on a film with Billy Wilder. The release of The Pink Panther and Dr. Strangelove within the same month turned Sellers into a Hollywood superstar. And he was married to one of the world's most desirable women. On the surface, life was perfect. Yet even at this peak of success, he couldn't kick his damaging addiction to the paranormal.
He used to have a lot of seances in Los Angeles. He used to have a lot of... and using the Ouija board and that sort of thing. People used to come over and they used to sit and work the Ouija board. And there was a lot of things came up about Jesse James and where all the treasure was buried.
Milligan was wonderfully sceptical about all of that. He said to me once, you know, how is it that when Peter meets all these people who've been reincarnated, you know, they're always the pharaohs, they're always Catherine the Great. You know, he never meets someone who cleaned the toilets in the pyramids.
Newfound stardom did nothing for Sellers' self-confidence. The insecurity that blighted his whole life began to affect his marriage to Britt.
He had this beautiful girl now, married her, and he was convinced that he would lose her because he didn't really believe that anyone like her would want to be with him. So he was obsessed that she was being seduced by her other co-stars here, there and everywhere. And he was mad with jealousy.
Sellers began to use drugs in a desperate attempt to enhance his sexual performance with his younger wife. Heavy use of the stimulant amyl nitrate put a strain on his heart. On April 5th, 1964, Peter Sellers appeared on The Steve Allen Show. This performance was nearly his last. The next day, he woke up with severe pains in his chest.
It was more like a commotion one morning, and then I sort of stumbled out of bed, and there he is being wheeled out on a gurney. Out by these, he propped himself up on one arm and said, not feeling too good, I've got to go down to the hospital, I'll see you a bit later.
Sellers suffered 8 serious heart attacks and was apparently dead for a minute and a half.
During that period of time that he was in, he had near-death experience, which he told us about. He described them as a tunnel, and at the end of this tunnel there was a light, but he said it wasn't his time. There was a hand stretched out which was pulling him back, saying, "Not yet, Peter, not yet, Peter," he said, and then it brought him back to consciousness.
The telephones just never stopped ringing because the English press got hold of it, and he was such big news that it was almost like the Queen having a heart attack, I suppose.
I was asked to do his obit for the Express. I was very uncomfortable with this, and it was very unprofessional of me, but I found it very difficult to do, and as it happened, we didn't need it because he lived. But afterwards, he said, "Oh, I knew about that. I knew that you didn't have to do it. I was telling you. It was me. I was telling you."
As I remember there being a sort of large arm. I can only describe it, but if you think of a whole area of blackness, now imagine an arm, bare arm, but a very strong arm, and pulling you for you to hold on to it, an outstretched arm. And you hold this arm says, in its own way, you can feel it saying, "I won't let you go, I won't let you go." And I held on to this arm, and I knew as long as I had that arm that I wouldn't die.